Hi, I'm Drayton Fraley, and today I'm going to be going over a rebuild that we did recently on a 2-liter turbocharged Ford EcoBoost motor. Um, Here I'm actually installing the main bearings, and I've taken them all out in order because we took these motors apart. Um, as they were already put together. So we put everything back into the order of which we took it out. So that way everything would go together and spin properly. Now, if I was putting a motor together for running purposes, I would use plastic gauge and check the clearance here on the crank. I'd put the crank in like I am now, and when I put the girdle on, I would torque the girdle down with plastic gauge in place on the crank to make sure that I had the proper clearance between the crank and the bearings for oil to circulate on the crank. Alright, now I've got the girdle in place with the bearings in place. Now I'm just going to take the main bolts, and I am going to tighten them into place, but I'm not going to tighten them all the way down. I'm just going to tighten them to the surface of the girdle, and then I'll go in with my torque wrench, and I will torque them down. And this particular car, the torque spec is 25 foot-pounds first time, and then 40 foot-pounds the second time, and a 90-degree turn after. So I'm going to put all the main bolts in place, and then I'm going to start with the torque wrench, and you will see that here in just a moment. And here again, all I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten the bolts down to the surface of the girdle before I torque, because then I'm going to torque them down with the torque wrench in the proper sequence, because there's also a sequence that you have to follow. All of that information was looked up on ProDemand, and we were using it while we were going through the rebuild. Here I'm torquing them down. After I'm finished torquing, I'm going to go in with a torque angle gauge and a breaker bar, and torque them down to the proper angle.
Okay.
Now I'm putting the piston in. You want to make sure that the rings are offset, so that your compression ring and your oil ring are off, or your scraper ring are all offset, and then the oil ring as well. You want to make sure that it's offset too. That way you're going to hold the most compression that you can hold, and you're not going to lose a bunch of air, or a bunch of compression, excuse me. There's also an arrow on the front of the piston, and the pistons are numbered. The arrow actually indicates that the piston goes toward the front of the motor. Here I'm going to take and I'm going to put the piston in. I'm going to use the piston ring compression tool, and I'm going to knock the top of the piston with the back end of like a rubber mallet, with the wood from a rubber mallet, so that way it doesn't damage the metal surface of the piston. Also, you want to be careful that the rod itself doesn't scrape down the wall of the cylinder, and you want to also make sure that you have the crank in the proper position. The crank was slightly off. You'll see that here in a moment, and I actually had to turn it slightly with a breaker bar to get everything to line up the right way. And these tools can be tricky. You want to make sure that you have the piston ring compression tool flat against the deck of the block when you're hitting it in with the mallet, because if it's not, the rings will snag and catch up on the sides of the wall, especially if you don't have a lot of a chamfer. They'll hang up and get hung before they go in. That one actually went in very, very easily. Here I'm going to stick my hand in and feel for the rod and lift the rod off the cylinder wall, so that way it can't do anything. I didn't have it available to me, but normally you would want to put like some type of a prophylactic type thing on the ends of the rod, so that way it doesn't scrape or scratch the cylinder wall, because there's a hone in there that you really don't want to mess up, so that the rings can seat properly, especially if you're rebuilding a motor. Here I'm having to spin the crank slightly because it is off from where it needed to be for the rod. Here I'm tightening the connecting rod. These had cracked caps. You want to make sure that whenever you're taking a motor apart, that you keep the caps in the correct order, facing the correct direction. So that way, when you go to put it back together, it'll be a lot easier. When we first took this motor apart, we actually had to rematch all the caps. Here, Noah is putting on the balancer, or balance shaft. Again, we're just tightening that down to the surface, and you'll torque that as well. Here we've got Sean, and he's putting in the oil pump pickup tube. Here's our oil pan, and again with the oil pan, it's another one of those ones you want to torque down in sequence. You don't want to get it askewed at all, really, because it'll leak a lot of oil. There you go. And we're just using that again just to tighten it down, and we'll go and check the torque. We're not going down very, very far with it or very tight with it. And again, there is a sequence that all that needs to be tightened in as well. Here he's putting on the rear main seal.
Yep.
Again, you want to check and make sure there's no special, if there are any special procedures that are required. With that one, it was just put in place. Here we're placing the head on. That was the head gasket that you just saw. You want to make sure that you have it facing the correct direction and that it goes over the ports the way that it's supposed to for coolant and oil. The head actually sits on a set of dowels, so when you got that in place, it pretty much holds itself there.
Pause it.
We're putting the head bolts in. Again, those are also torqued down into a certain sequence, and as well as with a torque requirement and torque angle requirement as well. Yeah, here we're putting the buckets in over the springs. The cams will ride these, they'll sit on top of those, and gives a smooth surface for the cam to open and close valves on. That is the secondary air pump. That's there for heating up the O2 sensors. So when the car first starts running, it heats it up properly. This is a high volume fuel pump. It's a secondary pump as well, but it helps for the direct port injection. Again, with the cam caps, you want to make sure that you take them off in the direction that you put them on in. So when you take it all apart, you want to have them all going the correct direction so that they don't scar or score on the cam shaft. We've got the motor back together. We got the head torqued down. We've got the cam torqued in place. Here I'm putting in the direct port injectors. Again, that's another area where you want to look for your workshop manual or whatever you have to make sure that you torque it down properly, because there is a lot of pressure running through those injectors. I'm putting in the timing chain guides here. There I have, I'm putting the guide in place, and there's an adjuster there. You can see the things sticking in it. That's what holds the chain tight. Here I've adjusted the timing. I'm checking timing, actually, is why I'm screwing this in. So I'm making sure that I'm not getting hung up anywhere when the motor turns over. This is the front cover for the engine. Oil sits in behind there in the chains and keeps the chains lubed. Again, I'm only tightening this down, not all the way tight, so I can torque it on. There it's torqued on. Here we're putting on the intake manifold. No, goofing around a little, putting it upside down for camera hysterics. Again, torque that down to sequence. There's not many bolts that hold it on, so you can only really put it on one way. We've also put the valve cover back on in place, as well as the variable valve timing actuators there. And there we go. We have a complete motor. Thank you for watching.